Sveiki, įsijungę Lietuva Amerika, kaip visas su jumis esu aš, Vincentas Palubinskas. Šiandieną mūsų serija yra su Kaush Arha. Jis vienas ryškiausių JAV užsienio politikos strategų, dirbęs kaip vyresnysis patarėjas USAID, anksčiau pereinamojo laikotarpio patarėjas JAV ambasadoje Kabule, bei JAV Vidaus reikalų departamento viceministras. Šiuo metu Kaush yra Atlantic Council bei Krach Institute for Tech Diplomacy vyresnysis bendradarbis, dirbantis ties didžiųjų galių konkurencija, technologinė diplomatija ir demokratijų atsparumo stiprinimu. Šioje serijoje kalbėsime apie geopolitikos persiorientavimą, Laisvą Šiaurę ir JAV nusigręžimą link vadinamojo Indo-Pacific regiono. Tikiuosi patiks.
We can do it. Okay, little introduction. Vincent is third immigration Lithuanian American with whom, actually with his grandfather, I started the show like 30 years ago. With his father, we created different organizations here, and now he's, helping me on everything like young generation of Lithuanian Americans building it all. But Kaush, what I met you in Napoli, when I listened to your presentation, my first idea was, my God, I have to bring this man to Lithuania. We more or less agreed on some event next year to speak free North, Indo-Pacific, free seas. But can you briefly introduce you to Lithuanians? Who are you? And also about those great ideas who are sometimes so distant when we are under constant attack of Russians and Belarusians with all those drones, with all the crisis, internal and external we have. Usually we don't see the big picture, though we like to see it. Our country has great history and we've been driving, changes in the region. So when I listened to you, I heard something from the past that could bring us to the future. But please, if you could introduce you to Lithuanians.
No, it's an honor and pleasure to talk to Lithuanians. Most of us Americans, and I in particular, hold Baltic nations in high regard for your bravery, for your grit, everything from Estonia, Latvia, down Lithuania. And appreciate everything that you guys do. I would actually disagree with you a little bit. I think small countries have no choice but to think big and be aware of what the big countries are doing, so that sometimes their small countries are better at thinking big than big countries are. But anyway, my own background, I started my life and professional career in my home state of Wyoming. I worked for the state of Wyoming. Then I went to federal government working for President Bush at Department of Interior in several capacities. And then under President Obama, I served in Afghanistan, dealing with our issues there. And in President Trump's administration, I was back in DC addressing most economic issues around the world, especially the threat to that China presented, not just China, but sort of China, Russia, and Iran in that order. And appreciated Lithuania is sort of principled or brave or opportunistic or calculating, whichever way it may be, moved to allow Taiwan to open an office. I thought we were big fans of that action in the White House. So great to be there. But the issue that I spent most of my time was in the Indo-Pacific, particularly this notion of free and open Indo-Pacific. And it's a notion that really was introduced by President Abe. And I think it's a good way to look at that if we connect more of the world's free and open spaces, like free and open Indo-Pacific with free and open Mediterranean Atlantic through a free and open Indo-Mediterranean connecting it, then it allows American, European, Western sort of values and interest to have more room to play, and it reduces the operational space for more malign actors that want to have spheres of influence Russia, China being the primary ones. So that's something that I spend a lot of my time on today. It's a kind of a concept for people to understand. It's a little bit like the free world that we used in the old sort of Cold War era, but free and open is sort of perhaps an updated version of it, that we ought to be living in free and open spaces, in free society, in free economies, in open societies, open economies, and any version of that, there is not a hard and fast rule on it. Most countries want to have free and open, flexibility, no more than the Baltics. So that's what that is. And I think it has a particularly important and timely and relevant application in the case of Arctic and Baltic seas issue, in this notion of free north that I discussed with you. And if you want me, I'll jump right into it or stop there.
Exactly. This is very, very interesting. I'm just from our port city. When I just mentioned it, I thought they will not get it easily, but actually they were enthusiastic. They said, ice is melting, all the ways to the north, to the world is opening for us. So, and of course we have challenges and opportunities, but if you could explain it a bit more, I would appreciate it greatly, because it seems what is needed.
Yeah, so I think one of the important issues, and it comes back to what I mentioned about the smaller countries, you got to be more nimble and more opportunistic on how the world currents are moving. So there are sort of 3 or 4 important sort of geopolitical currents that allows, I think, countries up in the north to sort of take advantage of. One is the geological fact of just warming seas, and sort of at least the ice is not as much as it used to be. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be. You may end up having more ice in the winter, but in the summer months you may end up having less ice. So that makes the whole ocean, the Arctic Ocean, more accessible, more open, so more countries can come in, more development of marine resources. People be fishing more, they would be mining more, they may be doing more research, they may be using it for more military bases and military operations. So all those becomes more available. And as you know, as opposed to Antarctica, there's no particular landmass. Arctic is largely an ocean with ice floats on it. So that's one thing that's happened. And so that should bring all countries to attention of what's going on. And it's a country that on the Arctic side is just dominated geographically by Russia, just because it has a very big, large chunk of it. So that's one. That's one important issue. The second important issue that Russia is weakening is in a very asymmetric relationship with China. So I said there are ironies to this. While Russia wants to be very powerful and project power towards fighting with NATO or with the West, which it says it is closer to culturally, it actually is losing its ground and power very, very fastly vis-a-vis China, which it says historically that is culturally opposed to. But now both militarily and economically, it's basically, very soon to become Chinese vassal in large measure. So that the way that shows up, that in Arctic, Russia was very, very possessive not to let China in when it was powerful and didn't need China. Now that's not the case. And so you find that Chinese are not only in, but they are sort of collaborating with the Russians in the Arctic, whether it's for, research bases or military or exploration or development or any of the above. That's number 2.
Let me interject just for a quick second before you continue. I mean, it's also very important to mention that, us in Lithuania, we usually spend all our time talking about Russia, but it's impossible to talk about Russia without recognizing that the Chinese are currently bankrolling the whole war in Ukraine, essentially.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I mean, if Russia, if Chinese money was not supporting Russia, the war would be very different than what it is today. Sure. Now, so that's what's going on there. And then the other issue is that if you just look at Arctic nations, they're also a little bit possessive of the Arctic. So they have a council, they kind of work among them, 7 countries. That is interesting, but it's not the mainstream to the rest of the world. The rest of the world thinks, okay, it's fine, is important. There are interesting issues among Eskimos and polar bears and other whales and stuff. But things changed when Finland joined NATO. It really changed. This issue sort of changed. And now you have a country that, other than Sweden also joining, you have countries which are both Arctic and Baltic. I mean, they're not on the ocean, but they are within the Arctic Circle. So they're Arctic and Baltic country. And all of a sudden, we have now a solid NATO membership from Finland to Alaska. So we have an interesting aspect now where, and increasingly, Baltic and Arctic will become more like one theater as opposed to 2 separate theaters. So if the trade, one of the important things is whether we may have more sort of trade routes coming through the north or not, whether that happens or doesn't happen, you'll find more sort of activities, more convergence of security interest and economic interest in largely like-minded countries from Finland, the Baltics, the Nordics, UK, Greenland, Canada, United States. They're so you'll find that both security-wise, both economically, there will be strong converging interest, even though the rhetoric may at times be unfortunate, like in the case of Greenland. But the reason Greenland really, really matters is because the ice is changing very, very quickly, and somebody's got to invest even more in Greenland security and military. And the only country that can do it is really the United States. And there ought to be more sort of organized sort of institutional relationship between Denmark, Greenland, and United States, not separately together. But anyway, so you have a convergence of interest and geographies between Arctic and Baltic. And I think joining the Baltic, which is far more of an economic powerhouse in some ways than Arctic, much more mainstream, brings Arctic and Baltic much closer to mainstream than just an Arctic issue. And so this notion of free North now, which is Arctic and Baltic, it's a very powerful concept of the 10, 11 countries that I mentioned, all NATO members, all coordinating on improving security assets, not only submarines, but ice frigates, ice cutters, all the ability to operate in this theater a lot more than we individually have today. That's an important concept. Our ability to work together to use Arctic resources in a sustainable manner, in a responsible manner. And our also ability to do the cutting edge technology, because all of us are technology powerhouses, and how we can use that in this particular sector. So free North, I think, is a more, again, an interesting concept, and it's consistent with the free and open Black Sea, with the free and open Indo-Pacific, with the free and open Indo-Mediterranean, with the free and open, Mediterranean Atlantic. And so again, it connects the idea of having a free and open North Arctic and Baltic Sea, which is not abused or has spheres of influence by Chinese or Russians to peddle their own issues like they do even in the Baltic Sea or in Arctic or in South China Sea. So anyway, it's both a progressive, future-looking idea, but at the same time also sort of preventing and preempting any sort of mischief that these two nations may be up to in that theater. Anyway, that I'll stop there.
Yeah, this is all very interesting, and I mean, this is not a subject I'm generally well versed in, but from what you're saying, it sounds to me that essentially the common denominator standing in the way of, be it a free North or a free Indo-Pacific or essentially free sea in general, is China. China sounds like it's the main obstacle. How do we get past that obstacle, or at least how do we overcome it in a way?
Well, so I will rephrase it a little bit. I mean, I don't think I'd like to, point too many fingers. The bottom line is that there are adversaries which will take advantage of weaknesses or vacuums or empty spaces. So at this moment, I think, Chinese have a different political system, a different worldview than we do. We can argue which one is good or bad. We certainly think ours is better. But, there's more than 1 billion people that think that way. That's fine. But we need to less focus upon, China being the bad element and sort of, this common theme, like you said, is more about that we collectively need to be strong enough that we do not allow and provide enough room for mischief or nefarious activities which are contrary to our interest in areas that are, common shared platforms for us. So I would say Free North is something that we cannot ignore. We should take it seriously. We would put both the political attention, the economic attention, and the resource to make it as strong and as visible a concept, so that we cannot sort of provide, as you said, the troublemakers are not troublemakers, but people who have different interests come and peddle their interest in that area, which may be contrary to ours.
Can I just ask a more economic question? Because as a hawk, as former diplomat, security-oriented man, everything for me sounds perfect. But I was just speaking with businessmen from our port, and they were kind of enthusiastic about that. Why this enthusiasm? Is it because instead of being cornered by those autocracies who bring security risks, we connect the most growing regions of this planet, like our region, Indo-Pacific, that could bring new possibilities?
No, absolutely. I mean, I haven't yet mentioned Japan and South Korea. I mean, there are other powerful entities on the other side of this Free North. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I just listen. Since you're talking to shipbuilders, one of the biggest growing industry would be sort of ice shipbuilding, kind of in particular. You already have super heavyweights in South Korea, in Japan, in Finland. And I think to be able to build on that, just to put in perspective, I think the numbers are very stark that, Russia has somewhere over 113 or so ice cutters. And we collectively, among all the people that we just mentioned, maybe it's 13 or 17. So it tells you there's a very big gap that needs to be made up. And it's got to be made up with these shipbuilding already there. I mean, there's interest that United States and others should also build this, and certainly Canada. But there's a lot of room for sort of comparative advantage. A submarine fleet up north is critical. Again, United States would have a strong comparative advantage to make sure, take that part on it. At this moment, Finns and others have a stronger comparative advantage in making ice cutters. So it makes sense for them to sort of take the lead in that. There'll be other sort of European shipbuilding ability that can sort of look into and saying, hey, we need to also make not only commercial shipbuilding, which is something we all need to do, but also, frigates and destroyers that can function in this environment. That's another so just that, and I haven't even got into the underwater drone stuff that you will need just for critical infrastructure. So the idea in Baltic Sea, with all this nefarious activities by Chinese and by Russians cutting, cables and pipelines and stuff, we will basically need a navy of unmanned submersible drones to protect them, as opposed to sort of sending human kind of a needs on. So that's a growing industry which also has to function. That's just this. Then we're talking about communication industry, which will be opening up tremendously, both satellite driven and cable in the north. It's also an easier way, if it opens up, to lay the cables than go around. As we know, Earth is wider around the equator than is around the poles. And then we are looking at a huge area of critical minerals development, oil and gas development. All these things will be open, and sort of the more clean, advanced IT technology stuff, which are powerhouses all the way from Finland to United States to South Korea and to Japan. So there's a remarkable commonality of economic and security interest, and getting Baltic to sort of be the backstop of Arctic really strengthens the Arctic a lot. I mean, it makes it stronger, and so obviously makes Baltic as well, as opposed to treating them two separate theaters, because they're increasingly linked. And so I think that's why I think that the free North and this concept of making sure that this region remains free and open societies and free and open economies, I think should be in all our best interest.
Well, and I will wait for the moment you come to Klaipėda, you see our so-called LNG terminal with the name Independence that actually South Korea built for us already. And I know that those people in the port, they're searching exactly for strategic investors in Indo-Pacific area because they see this is as a huge potential. And can I add just another element that inspired me as old Lithuanian representative of old nation? We also mentioned that this would bring Baltic and Black Sea together. This will bring that, corridor from north to the south, including using Ukrainian experience of fighting the evils and devils in the sea with sea drones and other stuff. So that is actually, I have a knight of 16th century behind me. He was doing it with, actually he was half Italian. Living close to the Trieste. So Lithuanians and Italians and Poles, we were building that north-south corridor, not to allow, some Asiatic tribes, be it Mongols or Russians, to destroy it. So it sounds kind of very Lithuanian. I like it.
No, but I think you're right. So I think at this moment, there are sort of three very important and promising regional initiatives. I think free North and a natural convergence of Baltic and Arctic is happening. Similarly, just like the natural convergence of Baltic and Arctic Ocean, there's a natural convergence, a historic convergence of Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. So that Indo-Mediterranean was the world's oldest and the most successful and the most sort of thriving trade corridors from the Roman Empire days to the Indian Empire days, which was very, very. So now, historically, both these entities are coming back up to become the resurgent sort of economic security corridors. And where do they meet? They meet in a way. What we need is, there is, as you mentioned, a 3 Seas initiative, or the old Amber Road, where the ambers of Baltic ended up in, upper Adriatic all the way down. So what you have now is the 3 Seas is connecting the free North to the Indo-Mediterranean. And that, when you connect them all three together, then you've got a really powerful new sort of economic engagement strategy that's going on. That is how you connect countries after the age of globalization. So how do you connect the globe after globalization? You got free North, you got 3 Seas, you got IMEC, or the Indo-Mediterranean, and that's how you are sort of connecting it. And it's a powerful thing, and collectively, these are all organic. There's no one country dominating the other. Every country is working in its own self-interest. You put all these three together, and this is a very, very sound and a very strong response to BRI. It's 10 times better. It's both, because again, it's more money, it's more interest, it's all bottom-up driven. And it's an interest of everybody. It's not asymmetric, but one country is telling other countries what to do and others. So yeah, I mean, if you look at it in a broader framework, there's even more sort of interesting elements to it. Yes.
All right. Well, this sounds to me like Lithuania, of course, can play a huge role in this, and it would be great to see how, rather than just theoretically, how we can actually put these things in motion and get things going on our end, how we can actually contribute to the wonderful idea of a free North and a free world.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, again, committed folks are those who change the world, not big or small, but it's the commitment and perseverance. We're also trying to work on if we can get a free North forum of sorts in Canada in March or sometime. But I think we just need to have more people talk about it, because again, the idea is not one fixed idea and everybody has to follow. The beauty of it is that all countries need to come up with their own interpretation of it. So it's very interesting that Lithuania says, this is how I see free North fit me. Other Baltics may say that, the Finns may say the same thing, the Danes may say the same way, the Canadians, the Americans, the Koreans. So it's very important that it's organic, and then you bring them together and say, okay, what are the overlap, where's the converging part, where's the complementarity, as opposed to, Kaush sits at it and writes this beautiful paper that lays out all the 17 points of how this is going to fit in. I let Henry Kissinger do that, but I think it'd be nice to have a more organic process. So it'd be great to hear from Lithuania how Lithuania sees it, and in Lithuania's own interest, not anybody else's.
So you convinced me we will do it. I really have a support of my foreign ministry, of port, of different politicians and businessmen. We will do it next year in Lithuania. But at the end, let me provoke a bit, just to have a bit more lively conversation. The picture you described is perfect, actually perfect. It's actually what we started to build under Biden administration even. We were the first member state of EU to conclude Indo-Pacific strategy with Americans. Americans helped us to survive when China sanctioned us heavily. But explain me what's happening with current Trump administration. When I see American generals going and embracing and kissing Lukashenko, sending some troops to observe Zapad military exercises that are of offensive nature. And Trump administration is speaking about warming up relations with dictatorship that is destroying us for, at least 30 years. The same might happen with Putin. The same seems is happening with India. That we just started to build relations. Indian ambassador just appeared in Vilnius. Historic, first one. We were so glad. So do you think Trump administration is moving to this strategic framework, or those are just great Americans who are more or less putting that American interest together?
Well, I think first of all, there's a great adage by Ronald Reagan which says, "Thou shalt not speak ill of another Republican as a Republican." So I shall not. The second thing is, it's important to remember what Churchill said, which is that America will do the right thing after it's exhausted all other possibilities. So there is a limit to our exhaustion of other possibilities. No, but I would say that any America, anytime, is stronger because of its allies. And if we are not treating our allies with due respect and due consideration, it is wrong, and we shouldn't do it. I think that should be clear to everybody. And certainly treating them worse than we treat our enemies is absolutely wrong. Having said that, I think I really had one of the most rewarding experiences working for President Trump during first term. I hold Marco Rubio in highest regard. I think Mr. Bessent and other people in the cabinet are doing a good job. There is a way to look at, which is, looking at it in a constructive and optimistic way. I mean, that's the most probably American way to do it, as opposed to always saying, I would have done it better. Yes, we may have done it this way or that way. The lot of sort of both foreign policy and domestic arrangements had a kind of a expiry date on them, and they were past expiry, and they were rather suboptimal and uncomfortable sort of constructs. And one thing that a service that President Trump is doing is even though it's a bitter medicine at the moment, but he is getting rid of these old, obsolete sort of systems. Now, the question is what comes afterwards, and as he's spending enough time to do what it is, we'll wait and see. But it does give opportunities to people to say, hey, yes, it's okay to have affection and good nostalgia over how it used to be before, but it's time to really focus and make the future stronger. And I absolutely believe that the future can be stronger. I mean, the NATO is stronger today with 5% than it was. You know, there is a likelihood that EU and India will have a free trade agreement. It probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done the strong tariff issue with both countries. So there is a way where you may actually end up with a stronger situation. I think this, including in the Free North as well, there is a strong convergence that if Canada can finally step up to play the role that it needs to play as the largest amongst us, the non-Russian entity to have the biggest sort of surface area in the Arctic, then it would be a good thing for all of us, irrespective of. So, having Finland in NATO is a very big deal to all this. So there are opportunities that actually, I would say, a high likelihood that we end up in a much stronger place, even though it may be at the cost of some emotional relationship that we used to have in the past, and perhaps we have lost it to some degree. But that's where I would like to sort of focus and say that's the best way to look at it. That a opportunity has been provided by doing away with a lot of nonsense, which politeness and complacency had done it. And the issue between transatlantic side, both Americans and Europeans have been seeing the world slightly different since 1989. We would just start looking at it slightly. So this convergence is not just related to Trump. It was there. It's probably most stark in President Obama, even though he may be more polite about it, but it was more stark probably under him. And so I think keeping that along in a sort of a complacent manner and not talking really openly, but sort of saying, yeah, well, we got Indo-Pacific interest and this and that. I think to some degree to talk openly and sort of, have a system that sort of crashes and burns a little bit so we can rejuvenate it, re-energize it. That's where we are at. And I believe that if we did a Free North, we'll be a lot stronger than we ever were in the Arctic and the Baltic collaboration. That the chances for us to have a much stronger, a regional trade agreement, we will never call it, transatlantic investment and partnership, we call TTIP. We will not mention it, but that's where we are kind of headed towards a much stronger, because WTO, again, is a suboptimal exercise, because in a free trading nation group, you let in the biggest state-run economy in the system. So that system just could not function with China in it. And I think this notion of having a stronger trade arrangement between US and EU is more likely, even with the tariffs that are there present. I think that tariff stuff is not the end of negotiation, is the beginning of a negotiation, which we will be negotiating for next 5-10 years as we go through an arrangement. I think the opportunities for us to really work towards shared technologies for future defense, it is very, very rich and deep. The opportunities for us to strengthen our energy partnership, again, is very, so I would focus on those to say, how can we strengthen the transatlantic as opposed to some of the unfortunate rhetoric, which which is sad. I mean, frank of the matter, it's sad, but we don't have the luxury to sort of dwell on those things. You got to say how to continue to make things better. So anyway, that's my answer.
I agree, and let me finish with this kind of very Lithuanian statement. We absolutely share your vision about the new world, but we have to finish with our old enemies. Those Russians, communists, and KGBs, they are killing us here for more than 100 years. They are going back to old practices. This axis of evil that we see emerging much stronger than actually the first axis of evil of the Second World War. About 560 military agreements, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. It's scary. So we want Ukraine in our blood system. We want Ukraine in NATO. We want Americans to introduce those crushing sanctions. We don't want them to embrace dictatorships in Minsk. We want freedom in Minsk. We treat those Belarusians as old European Slavs. They were having the same empire with us for 500 years. So, and we don't want Americans to stop their military assistance. Pentagon just suggested to cut Baltic security initiative. We are fighting it back in Congress. We want American troops in because we are building our defense as champions, 5% and more in the Baltic. So I hope we will do it all. Thank you, Kaush, for this big strategic vision. This is what we need. Actually, you're right. This is what we like as small countries because our heart is big. To survive in this troubled region, you need a big heart, great ideas. And thank you for bringing it to our region. And I really hope that next year we treat you well. We meet you in Lithuania and we show the beauty we've been fighting here for 1,000 years already. Thank you, Karl.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity. I really like it. And again, you've got a great ambassador representing EU in Washington, D.C. So, good for you. And I look forward to working with you in the future. So, kind of a call for Jovica. She's doing fantastic work and look forward to working with you guys.
And please meet new ambassador, Gediminas, who was ambassador for Free Seas Initiative. He knows every detail of it. So we have now good 2 ambassadors in DC. Thank you so much. Until next time. Okay.
Thank you so much. Amen.
Goodbye.
Take care. Na ką, šiandien išgirdome, kad Lietuva gali turėti ateitį naujajame pasaulyje. Laisvoje Šiaurėje beliko mums tik atlikti namų darbus, statyti infrastruktūrą, o net raideliuoti dėl postų ar stumtis vardan galios žaidimų. Labai rekomenduoju iš tiesų pasidomėti Kaush Arha biografiją, labai mane suintrigavo iš tiesų, turiu pasakyti, ir tikiuosi, kad ši serija jums patiko. Rašykit, komentuokit, prenumeruokite, likite su mumis. Iki kito karto.